There you are, my brother.
What's up, my man?
Nothing much, man. Today was a nice day. It was a nice day.
That is a good thing, man. It's a good thing. What is today? Today is Hump Day, man. It is Wednesday today. So yeah, it was a nice day. Was a good day, I should say. Well, let me just get my stuff set up here. Put it up here so I can monitor the questions and the comments. And hello everybody, and welcome to Facebook Live with Mel and Charlie. It's Wednesday, December 9th already. Pretty soon Christmas, pretty soon a new year, and hopefully 2021 is going to be a better year. I mean, it has to be.
Oh,
But tonight we have, oh yeah, please share, because tonight's going to be a great night. We got some awesome guests. We got Dr. Jonathan Dworkin returning to share, to talk about what's going on in a COVID world and give us some insights, as well as Dr. David Derauf. We talked about them the other night. He's the executive director, or the medical director at Kokua, Kalihi Valley, KKV. And of course, Dr. Dworkin, Jonathan Dworkin, is a infectious disease specialist. So, I'm sure it will be enlightening tonight. I really believe that, and it's always fun. It's always fun. And at the heels of a very interesting Senate COVID committee hearing today, I did get to watch it live. I shared the link on my wall, so hopefully a lot of you guys got to watch it. It was quite interesting. The the differences. Interesting to see Mayor Roth from the Big Island making his first public appearance as a new mayor. But it started off with Mayor Caldwell, and then it went straight to Lieutenant Governor Green, and then we had Dr. Dara O'Carroll, Mayor Victorino, and then wrapping it up was our own Kauai's own Mayor Kawakami. So I know you watched it, Charlie. What are your thoughts, man? What did you take or get out of that? Uh, I was very happy that the Senate COVID committee. I spoke to Senator Dela Cruz. He was the guy I spoke to the other night that I mentioned. I didn't mention his name, and I told him you got to get Dr. O'Carroll on. I mean, it was very obvious that he was not familiar with the intricacies of the report that Dr. O'Carroll did. So they had it on. They had him on, and but what were your thoughts, Charlie? What did you take away from that?
well, like anything else, it was been down that path before. It was a fact-finding mission. There was a lot of good information that was shared by all. By all, I mean, I have to say that I was delighted that our lieutenant governor was able to share where he got his information from. It did seem off point though, but nevertheless, I mean, it's what it is. So there's comparisons that can be made, right? And so that was good. It's better than just saying something but not having anything factual presented. And so he did present some numbers. I said, okay, good. And then just listening to all of the different presenters, including Dr. O'Carroll, it made it quite clear what we were looking at. And if I think it was Senator Favela, if I'm not mistaken. I think okay, there's some wind noises. Hold on one second. Let me put my
Yeah, Senator Favela was on, Senator Mercado Kim, Senator Kidani, Senator De La Cruz, Senator Kyo Kalole, I think is the way you say it. And yeah, it was interesting. I think, Charlie,
how's that?
when
How's that? Any wind noises?
no, man, you sound so crispy, like you're right here.
No, no, no. It's just that they installed a new. I got a big picture window today installed. It's a huge one, not a sliding glass. It's a big picture window, so big that it looks like the regular size is just more cleaner.
Yeah, I got what I got from the lieutenant governor was a lot of bouncing around, evading the questions, and I was sending Senator De La Cruz some questions, but for all the speakers. But it was interesting because Dr. Or Josh Green couldn't really answer the questions. He didn't have all the numbers. He didn't have, he a lot of times he just said, hey, that I'll let Dr. Dewolf Miller answer that. Well, that question is best for the Department of Health, which I thought was a little disappointing because remember, he's the guy that came out with the 1 in 1,000. He was the guy that came out with one test, 72 hours. Is sufficient. It's more than enough. And now they're talking about moving the 72-hour to a 96-hour pre-test travel, which is really going to just provide another 24 hours for these people, these travelers, to get exposed to COVID before they get on that plane. So I don't get it. I understand what they're trying to do. It's almost like a shell game, trying to move everything around for the appearance that they're actually doing something. But I don't think they've sat down with the medical experts and really analyze what the outcomes can be. And then Dr. O'Carroll came up and put his presentation out, and I think a lot of the senators saw it for the first time. And I could tell by the questions by Senator Kidani and that they were kind of concerned as well. But it was interesting because it was, if you listen to Josh Green and he paints a picture that everything's working well, everything's fine, everything's groovy, and then when you hear from Dr. O'Carroll, then you see a picture that there is some concern that we better pay attention to, especially with what's going on in the continental United States. So I hope the Senate committee members were able to understand and grasp, because for us, Charlie, and our viewers, we've been following this for so long that we've seen the development of all of these. They haven't. They're basically fact finders, like you say. I hope they can understand what was said today.
Well, long story short, I know one of our guests is waiting for another one to come on. Whatever decisions are made, ultimately, it lies with the governor, and everything is based upon who's the right messenger, who can get the right message to the governor. Everything I think that has been conveyed to the governor has been, it has the appearance, but I cannot say for sure. But everything that's been conveyed to the governor has been something along the lines that they told the governor what the governor may or may not, well, most likely may want to hear. That's why he's able to make his decisions relatively quickly. Now, when there's a pondering type of evidence, like what Mayor Kawakami proposes, right? When there is too much thinking that needs to go on, I think it frustrates him to no point. And I'm pretty sure he asked one of the other table members, hey, take a look at this. Tell me what you think. Tell me if it's feasible or not. I wish you would say, if it's not feasible, explain why it's not feasible. Because I think, in the long run, if there's a good point made, knowing our mayor, he will take constructive criticism and say, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe we got to look at a different approach to this. But see, they're not even doing that. They're not even giving him the reasons why we're not approving your recommendation. So it makes it hard. And I see that the two candidates for the 2022 governorship, they both were agreeing with each other today. So that kind of was zippity doo dah, zippity eh.
Yeah, I think he was probably advised by his political advisors to stop the bashing, the political bashing. And I know somebody said that I'm coming in. My audio is not that good, but I've seen some of you responding that it's good for you guys. If you guys are having a problem hearing me, let me know. Just put it in the chat. I will say this, though. I was very proud of our mayor. He went up there and he basically laid it all out. He did not hold back. He did not shy away from why he did what he did. He made it very clear that he was left with no choice because the governor failed to approve his request. I think Senator Kidani was very complimentary and very thankful for, and the word she said was for standing your ground. Thank you, Mayor Kawakami, for standing your ground. And exactly, and he painted it all out. And again, and he made it very clear, we are not all the same. And I try to get the Senator De La Cruz, to ask the questions about the active cases, and the Lieutenant Governor could not answer that question. He said, "Well, yeah, there's always going to be a whatever." He used the term, basically saying there's always going to be a difference. Well, there shouldn't be a difference. This is a damn pandemic. This is a dangerous life. A life-threatening disease. So no, it should be accurate. And when you look at, basically, he said that the numbers between the active cases, the people that may have tested positive, didn't get the results that it came to Hawaii until after they arrived, that number is so small. Well, it's not small, Lieutenant Governor. Look at Kauai. The majority early on, from October 15th, majority of our cases came over was people that had got their results when they were here, after they arrived. So, but he couldn't answer the question, and he basically just said, he brushed it off. And I think that was a frustration for me. Mayor Kawakami was very to the point, obviously very diplomatic, and he just said that it was a tough decision, and it was a decision that had to be made based on the options that he had. And I know last night Tyson mentioned that, why aren't there more options? We should be able to figure out, and I agree. And there are other options. The other options include testing after arrival. The other thing that really was frustrating was the fact that the Lieutenant Governor talked about a second test upon arrival. We already beat that thing up. You take a test 24 hours before you depart. You get on a 6 or 7 hour flight, and you land in Honolulu or whatever island, and you get a second test. The span between the tests, you're talking only about less than a day, less than 24 hours. That's meaningless. You need that period of time. And what was interesting, Mayor Roth from the Big Island was kind of agreeing with the Lieutenant Governor, and then Mayor Victorino came out really strong and said, "I always supported the second test." It's so funny now how all the mayors are aligning themselves with our mayor. Remember when he stood alone? When he stood alone, no one was there. And all of a sudden now, because CDC recommends it, all the other mayors are saying, "Yeah, we support that. We support that."
Well, just so keep it very, very simplistic, or simplicity, I should say, for our viewers. Now I look back at this whole thing from the inception of this pre-testing, right? Regardless if it's 72 hours, 96 hours, to me, it really doesn't matter, because if you elect to take it the furthest day out from the day you travel, you leave that window of contamination, right? You can get contaminated at any time within that window. So it doesn't make sense to me on that. I prefer you taking the first test on the day of travel. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Land, and you quarantine for a couple days. So like if we're looking at a 5 to 7 day window. So if you fly on a Friday, you got Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you take your second test. You'll be in that viral period. They talk about the 5 to 8 day. You remember they were showing the chart?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To me, that would just solve everything right there. I think they're getting confused that when you get the 72 or the 96 hours, you confuse everything. You're saying that, oh, you're good to go, man. Yeah, you're good to go when you're back on the mainland for those hours. You're not good to go when you get in the airplane and land in Hawaii. That's the problem. So
Right.
why don't, if your target destination is Hawaii, get closer to the target destination and make your time frame within there, right?
Correct.
Now,
Correct.
unless
Real quick,
unless
I changed my microphone. Can you hear me now?
oh, real good, yeah, yep,
Okay. Okay.
yep,
Good.
very good.
Good. Thank you. Sorry
Now,
about that.
unless they're talking about testing, and you want to test prior to, I mean, for whatever reason, I'm looking at the fact that, okay, because what we're talking about is on safety bubble, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what the 72 hours is. It's like creating a bubble. You become sterile if you took that test and you do nothing else but wait until you depart. And even at that, I think you would have a hard time because you still got to fight the crowds at the airport. You still got to sit at that plane. You still got to fight the crowds when you land. Then deciding whether you take a rental car or not, you're still going to have to fight the crowds when you go to the rental car counter. So you get all those variables that allows you to come in contact and possibly get the virus then.
Well, I'm going to bring in David Derauf, Dr. Derauf. We'll wait for Dr. Dworkin, but I think being with the extras that we have tonight, I think with Dr. Dworkin as an infectious disease, and again, as usual, we haven't spoken to these two gentlemen prior to the show, but I'd be curious to ask the questions about extending 72 hours pre-travel testing to 96.
Mm-hmm.
Wow! Look at him. He's on the beach.
Yep, I moved to one of the Pacific Islands where they have a full lockdown.
And Dr. Dworkin is joining us right now.
There he is.
There he is.
Hello,
Looks
hello.
like in the exact same spot he was the last time. Did you ever move, sir?
I haven't moved at all. I've been here since we last spoke.
Well, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Dr. Dworkin, welcome back. Dr. Derauf, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And, we were just talking about today's Senate COVID committee hearing. I'm not sure if you guys had a chance to watch it, but it was pretty much the Lieutenant Governor, the 4 mayors, and Dr. Dara O'Carroll presenting different aspects of what we're doing. And of course, there's some I won't say conflicts, but there's definitely some contrast in the beliefs, mainly between the Lieutenant Governor and Dr. O'Carroll's presentation. I don't know if you all are aware of I'm sure you are, Dr. O'Carroll's recent report, his analysis that was peer-reviewed. Kind of wanted to touch on that tonight. And also the governor's recent decision to shrink the quarantine down from 14 days to 10 days for people that don't have a test. And what the Lieutenant Governor talked about today, expanding the pre-travel test time from 72 hours to 96 hours. But aside from that, man, we just have this, Dr. Dworkin, we just kind of have an informal conversation. And let's start with you, Dr. Dworkin, and maybe just bring us up to speed on what you've found, what you've heard, just give us an update, man. By the way, Dr. Dworkin, as we said earlier, is an infectious disease specialist. Dr. Derauf is the executive or the medical director, I think that's his appropriate title, for the Kokua Kalihi Valley Medical Center. So these are experts, not politicians. That's why we like you.
Well, I gotta set the record straight. I'm an expert in Kalihi, being a Kalihi boy myself. So I'm
Right.
I've got alumni right there. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Hello, Uncle Charlie. Yeah, nice to have a fellow Kalihi uncle on the line with me. I feel well supported.
Well, I love Kalihi. I mean, being that I'm white, when I go through Kalihi, I just go real quick. I drive fast, and I don't stop at red lights. I just keep on driving. That's it, man. I just fly like an eagle. So, Dr. Dworkin, bring us up to speed, sir.
There's been a lack of COVID in my neck of the woods. I'm happy to say recently we're here in the frigid north of Hawaii, on the slopes of Mauna Kea. And, we had a little, I'd say it was a mini surge. It was nothing compared to what we had in Honolulu, several weeks ago. And it was the same types of problems: overcrowded housing, some big events related to funeral service. It felt very Honolulu-like, even though it was in a rural setting. But the authorities here on the Big Island responded to it pretty aggressively. I was very impressed and happy with the way they jumped on it. And we haven't had a lot of a huge amount of community transmission, at least in this part of the island since. I watched some of Darren's testimony today, and I thought he did a great job. Obviously, I agree with him and his assessment of the risk. There's really two separate issues, and we discussed this, I think, before, guys, when I was on there. There's how many cases are slipping through the net, how many people come in, and we have competing estimates of that, right? We have, sort of the state estimate, and then we have Darren's assessment. I think Darren's closer to the mark, and the Kauai data, which is based on the 4-day test, supports that. And he made that case, I think, very convincingly. A separate issue is how much transmission is there from those tourists that come into the local community. And I think what we're seeing on Kauai is that, if we import enough cases, eventually there's local transmission. The story on Oahu has been a little bit different. We don't have a great handle on all the transmission on Oahu, but we know that there was already a lot of local transmission on Oahu. And the number of cases coming in relative to that, at least so far, appears to have been relatively smaller. So not every island is in the same situation. I was, what made me the happiest today from this testimony was watching your mayor, Kawakami, who I think is an absolute star. I mean, and here's what he said that I really loved. There was some pressure to sort of standardize all of the criteria across all the islands. And he was responding to that. And he said, very empathetically, he said, I understand why people want the rules to be really clear. I understand why there's this pressure to have all of the mayors doing it exactly the same way on all the different islands. But we are not all in the same situation. And I can't just set a bunch of rules and say, I'm going to stick to them no matter what happens. I have to see what's actually going on my island, and I have to respond to reality. That is the nature of an emergency. And I think he made that point very clear and insisted on having the flexibility to do what he needed to do to protect the people on Kauai. I love that answer. And I think David and I have been preaching something similar the whole time. It's not reasonable for people coming from states with thousands of COVID cases a day, where their own civic authorities are changing the rules every 48, 72 hours, to expect absolute certainty about what their vacation is going to look like a month in advance when they come to Hawaii. You have to do what you have to do to protect your island. And he just said that, and he said it in a very nice way. But I think it showed a very, very keen understanding of the emergency that he's facing. And I hope the other mayors same way. And as much as we can standardize, of course we should, but he's doing the right thing. And I really appreciated that answer from him.
Thanks, Doc. One of the things that was discussed today and we've been talking about for a while now is from October 15th, Kauai has reported all active cases. So every day we get a press release from the mayor, from the mayor's office. Today we had 2 new cases on Kauai, both community spread. But from October 15, 16, we've had the 3, the 4s, the 5s. In the beginning, it was mostly travel related. And a lot of these people were taking their test on the mainland, getting their results after they arrived. And when they got their positive result after they arrived on Kauai, we count it as an active case. Now, the state doesn't report it as a positive case for the state. It gets reported in the state that the test was done. So, and this is the numbers. That's why Dara and his team chose to use the data from Kauai, because it was accurate. It specified the active cases regardless of where they got the test.
Right.
It shows how many active people we have here on the island. Now, the other counties aren't doing that, but we are now looking today again. Yesterday we had 2 travel related, 1 community spread. Today was 2 new positives with both travel community spread. So now we're seeing the spread in the community. And that I think is starting to raise a concern. I think Mayor Kawakami mentioned that today in his dialogue. But so there is some concern, and the question is why. If anything should be standardized, it should be the reporting on all islands, so we can get the baselines and the benchmarks, and we're not doing that, and I cannot understand why.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. There's a lot of confusion over even what's going on. And we saw that with all the different, post-arrival testing schemes, right? So, fortunately, Aaron worked through all that so that we don't all have to. But we had the entry test here on the Big Island, which I think something. But as Derek has pointed out, it's not 4 or 5 days afterwards. It's not a PCR test. There's a number of problems with that. And when we were discussing it here locally, I certainly wanted them to do a test 4 or 5 days after arrival. One of the issues, and this is a drum David and I have been banging since the very beginning, and really David originally before me. One of the issues here is quarantine, right? So I mean, if we're not able to enforce quarantine, well, and Kauai has done better on that than some of the other islands. Then it makes it difficult to get that second test. So when we discussed it here locally, I really wanted that 4 or 5 day post-arrival test. And the answer that I've gotten, both here and on Oahu is, well, we can't find these people. They're already gone, and we don't have the manpower, the policing, and the whatnot to track them all down. So this goes back to what I think was the original error in the border control scheme, which was, how do we enforce quarantine? And there are other jurisdictions around the world where people go to a centralized quarantine location, and that's where they do their quarantine. Or at the very least, there's ways of knowing where they are while they're quarantining, and there's checkups and things like that. So the more we can enforce the quarantine, the easier it's going to be to do things like add post-arrival testing without it becoming a logistical nightmare and a huge burden for the police departments. And I think that's been one of the issues that's kind of hampered this. So what ends up happening is the government throws its hands up and says, well, we can't enforce the quarantine, so we'll just do an entry test, or we'll do an airport test, or we'll just do a pre-travel test. We all know it's not as good. And then we don't really know how much disease is circulating. Right? So I think we have to talk about quarantine if we're talking about 2 tests versus 1 test versus 3 tests.
So, Dr. David,
jump in.
Dr. David. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. David.
Well, thanks. I agree with everything John just said. I just wanted to take us back a little bit, because I think we forget that obviously at the outset of this pandemic, all of the infections were travel related, right? We didn't have this virus circulating on its own in Hawaii. It was brought in by travelers. We knew that. John was seeing them travel-related cases made up the majority, obviously at the beginning, of people in the hospital. And my experience early on, unfortunately, in Kalihi was we did pretty well, just a few cases, isolated cases here and there, up until sort of late June period of time. And what happened in our community that I believe really kicked this off, and this wasn't only Kalihi where this took place, but there was a few large funerals, and these were prominent funerals, and a lot of people came in from the mainland. And I heard about it through people I knew, some of them my staff, who said, we're going to be putting up quite a few people at my apartment, Dr. Derauf. They're coming in from Vegas. They're coming in from Los Angeles. They're coming in from Seattle. What do you recommend we do? And of course, my first thought was, this doesn't sound great. I mean, you're working in a health center. You've got people coming in from pretty high prevalence areas. At that time, not quite as high as it is now, but obviously back in June, it was pretty high. And so I saw, the writing on the wall here. And sure enough, it was a couple weeks after those funerals that the cases started to soar in that community. And I have no doubt that those were travel-related cases. And I think, so that's one point I'd like to make, is that we don't always, doing contact tracing is hard work. It relies on trust. And let's face it, the Department of Health hasn't built up a lot of trust in these communities that have been most adversely affected. They don't have people who, now they do, but they didn't have people who spoke the languages. They've never spent any time in these communities. They haven't reached out to them. They didn't put out educational materials in the right languages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you call up someone on the phone, you say, yeah, I want to know who you've been spending time with for the last couple of weeks. What's the answer you're going to get? It's usually going to be like, click, or I don't know. I don't understand you, but the advantage working in a health center that's been in the community for 50 years is that we built up along, our work all centers around careful relationships. And that's Hawaii. And that's how we work here. People, if you know them and they've known you and they trust you, they're going to share this information with you, and they do. And so little by little, we were able to piece together some of this. That trust, so number one, yeah, we don't know all the time that these are travel related, and far more of it probably is. But when I say travel related, I don't want to, I think sometimes we get confused thinking this is just tourism. It isn't. It's a lot of these cases, especially the early ones, were Hawaii residents coming back from travel, ski trips to Colorado, in Europe, were some of the ones I heard about. And it continues to be the case that returning residents, who probably have just as much risk of getting the disease when they're in the mainland, doesn't, just because they're an exempt category, doesn't mean that they're any less likely to get COVID. It might mean, in fact, that they're more likely to get COVID. And we've been treating them differently. The exemptions have been pretty generous. And I sold a car in July, and the person who bought the car for me, she said, yeah, I flew in from San Francisco yesterday. I said, are you supposed to be in quarantine? She's like, no, I'm a legal secretary. And I thought, wait, a legal secretary can get an exemption from quarantine? And it didn't make sense to me. But there's a lot of people who can get the exemption, and they have been taking advantage of it. And so, we've got a problem there too. One of the hardest things about this, when I'm listening to this conversation we're having, is there seems like there's too many moving parts. We have, who's supposed to go into quarantine, and who's supposed to get a test when, and if who's going to check up on this, and here we are, 9 months, fully 9 months into this pandemic, and we haven't figured this stuff out. We really need people to sit down and map it out and make it simpler. And simpler doesn't, and I agree with Mayor Kawakami, simple doesn't necessarily mean uniform. Simple means people can understand the rationale why you're trying to do. And by that, I mean the tourists too. They need to hear the story of why we want to be this strict. It's not because people here don't have aloha. It's because we do have aloha. And I think the kind of tourists that we want to attract to these islands will understand that. The ones who say, oh, well, the hell with you then, you know what? Plenty of other places you can travel to. But you know what? The Centers for Disease Control and your own governor are probably saying, please don't travel right now. And that's and I say that, and I think people will think, well, you're being callous to all the people who work in our visitor industry. No, I'm not. A lot of those people are my patients. I care deeply about them. I know the pain they're going through economically right now. I know how many of them want to get back to work. And they all tell me, but safety is my first priority, Dr. Derauf. Safety is my first priority. Every one of them. I've never heard someone say, no, to hell with safety. I just want to go back to work. So, I think, and it would be interesting to do a poll today to see where the general public stands on this, because I know in the past when they polled people, they found out that the people most affected economically are also the most in favor of stringent controls for this disease.
Let me ask the doctors this question. And this kind of goes, well, first I'd like to say thank you to both of you for your your opening comments and positions here. But you're right about one thing. It's funny how in Hawaii, we will give the tourist, our traveler, a little history about Diamond Head, or we give them a history about Kilauea and the volcanoes, right? Because they want to know that.
Yep.
But it's funny, during this pandemic, they won't give them any history about why we want to do things a certain way.
Yep.
So I said, if you're going to talk about tourism, then let's go the whole gamut. If we're over there teaching them about, how the old Hawaiian fishing styles were, how they made up the fish ponds, why it was done, why Hawaiians relied on the currents to bring the fish in, and you catch it when the current recedes, you catch your fish, and how you that's all history. And our travelers, they love that stuff. Okay. But yet when it comes to this pandemic, mum's the word, don't say anything.
Yeah.
So my question to both of you, astute doctors here, is do you see a difference between quarantine and culture? Because Dr. Dworkin, you said something very interesting in the beginning. Korea, and we've got US military servicemen going there, but they understand the culture and the importance of why quarantine is needed, and they'll abide by it, plain and simple. For some reason, every time a legal question is asked of the state, it goes to the AG's office, it always comes out opposite of what one would expect.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, we're going to give you this square peg, and now you need to figure out how you're going to fit in that round hole over there. I'm like, what? And that's what, so my question to both of you, what do you think? Do you think quarantine and culture is the state's position of how they're banging heads over this whole issue, which kind of leaves us in this quandary that we're in now?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, David. You take it first.
The first thing when you were talking about, people being interested in the history, and of course, that should include people needing to know the history of pandemics in these islands, because Hawaii is about as close to devastating pandemics for its population as any place on the planet. And of course, I think maybe many people will know the story of Hansen's disease and Kalaupapa, but most don't know that was just one of many, many pandemics that swept these islands. And, early on, it was apparent to me that of all the places in the world that would have a reason to be extremely sensitive about these issues, Hawaii there's no place that has better reason than Hawaii. And I would say I was opposed to the use of the word quarantine casually early on because of the historical injustice that was probably perpetrated in the name of quarantine for our Hawaiian community with Kalaupapa and other places. So I think, what we have done at KKV in this regard, and this pertains to quarantine, but it also pertains to testing and contact tracing. The key concept here is support for our community. And it has to come before all of those things, and it has to come after all of those things. So if you have a supportive attitude and relationship with the people you're working with, if you value them as important members of your community, if that relationship matters to you generationally, you're going to do what is necessary for those people to feel supported in a difficult time. And there is no more difficult time than if your family is all stricken with this illness, and some people have gone into the hospital, are really sick, and they're worried about what's going to happen. They've lost their source of income. You're asking them to stay at home for 2 weeks. They don't have enough food in the refrigerator on their shelves. They don't know how they're going to get their medications. They feel isolated and alone. And so much of the work that we've focused on in our organization over these past 9 months has been to support people from day one. And not before day one, actually, before they get tested. They have to feel safe to come in and be tested initially there was a lot of stigma around testing in our community. People, for a whole host of reasons, but many of them historical, didn't want to come in and get tested. Because if they were tested and they were found to be positive, there was huge stigma attached to that diagnosis. Oh, you've brought this bad disease into our community. You're a bad person. You're a dirty person. We worked long and hard with a group of influential leaders in the community, including ministers, to overcome that. Mostly just by listening, hearing them out, not trying to correct their views, hearing what their concerns were, making sure they felt validated and those concerns honored. And we couldn't have done that if we didn't know them. Every Tuesday night now we have a Zoom meeting with a group of leaders in the community. It's the highlight of my week. I learned so much listening to this group of people. They don't have medical or public health backgrounds, but they can tell me what's actually happening in the community, what people are actually talking about and care about. And so quarantine, I think ultimately for us and culture, there is this really there's another side to it than you meant. But I agree with you completely. We have been afraid at the outset from defining excellence for these islands. And Mayor Kawakami, I think, is the one who's come closest to saying what excellence looks like. And that means a true commitment to the safety of his community. And everyone else has kind of thought, well, we can't really do that. We're the United States. We don't do that kind of stuff. We don't quarantine, isolation in hotel. What? I mean, all those concepts seem foreign to us because we view ourselves as part of this larger country that has failed miserably. I mean, it's shocking. It really, I can't go a day, I can't go an hour without reflecting on how horrendous our nation has done during this pandemic. All of us should be outraged that we are one of the worst performing wealthy. Certainly we're the worst performing wealthy nation on the planet. And so why should Hawaii be, I mean, early on, I think both John and I were saying, why do we want to align with that culture? Why shouldn't we be looking to our Asian and Pacific Island neighbors who have done much, much better? And I mean, I think we know the reasons. Tourism is a huge percent of our economy here, and that terrified everyone. I'm really, I just want to say, all politics aside, whatever people's viewpoints are, I know how hard it is to be a politician right now. This is, being a politician in a pandemic, everyone's gonna hate you. And if they don't hate you, you're probably doing something wrong. And the best you can hope for is that when you come out the other end of it, people can go, shit, glad that guy was around. And we can look back to 1918 and see that phenomenon. How the leaders, the mayors who did well in 1918 pandemic were vilified at the time. It was the same thing that's happening now. If you act strong and tough, everyone's going to come down on you.
Maybe Kauai's an exception in the sense that he's had a lot more support from his community than some of our other mayors. I've been reflecting a little bit on Mayor Caldwell, and I think he's he hasn't gotten everything right, for sure. There have been things that could have been handled more smoothly, but I think he has, generally speaking, been committed to doing his best to control the disease. He put Honolulu through that second lockdown, which was pretty popular, and I think I can't speak for him, obviously, but I suspect that there's a part of him that wishes that was better received by the community than it in fact was, and I think it will be better received by history than it will be by the poll in November 2020, especially if we emerge from this relatively intact. Back to your original question, guys. There's quarantine for our own people when they're exposed, And that sort of echoes the story of Hansen's disease and what happened on Molokai. And I think we do have to be very careful with that. Then there's quarantine for people coming in for things like vacations. And, my take from the very beginning was ask for forgiveness, not permission. Do what you have to do to protect the island. And if it gets challenged in court, well, that's why we have lawyers. Go to court and they can fight. I'm not aware of any strong constitutional rule that prevents us from doing a central quarantine or a decentralized quarantine with enforcement mechanisms. I think we probably would have a good chance of winning those legal battles. And if we didn't, then we don't, but we should at least try. It was never really attempted. It was just sort of deemed politically unpalatable early on.
I think so, yeah. I mean, and we've heard that from constitutional lawyers. There's a smart constitutional lawyer at the University of Hawaii Law School who has spoken to us on a number of occasions. She said, governors and elected officials have extraordinary powers. That doesn't mean people can't sue them. They will. But in general, the courts have always sided with public safety. If an elected official really feels that they're doing the right thing for the right reason here during an emergency, most of the time they can do that. John and I were talking about one great quote from Tony Fauci in the early days of this pandemic. He said, if it looks like you're overreacting, you're probably doing the right thing. And I think it's hard to do the right thing because right now in Hawaii, because everyone will say, oh, but your number, we're doing so great. Why would we? Well, no, that's how you're doing great, is because you're, you didn't get there because you weren't being tough on this thing. And frankly, are our numbers great? Our numbers are hovering right around 100 cases, 7-day average. Is that great? If we were South Korea, that would be seen as really lousy. If we were Vietnam, that would be unimaginable. If that were Thailand, if that were New Zealand, frankly, if we were Australia, that would be unacceptable. That's seen as acceptable because the mainland United States is being overrun with this disease. And the hospital.
Yeah, today, that was part of the frustration was the lieutenant governor kept speaking about our numbers, the lowest in the country. Okay, well, we should be. We're comparing ourselves to, like you said, the worst nation dealing with COVID. But if you compared us with countries that have been successful, they were not doing very well. And he constantly says that. Every show he talks, every morning news segment, he talks about the same thing, minimizing the fact that this COVID is very dangerous. And by the way, Dr. Derauf, I think Dr. Dworkin already knows, but Charlie lost his brother to COVID early on in New York, one of the first casualties of this disease when we started this thing out back in March. So
I did not know that, Charlie.
Yeah. So we constantly hear this lowest hospitalization rate, lowest death rate, blah, blah, blah. So the perception is that we're doing so well, that the Safe Travels program is working so well. And yet, when you look at the numbers on Kauai, it's not doing well. We have seen the virus enter our communities. We lost a good friend of mine and Charlie's, the second casualty on Kauai, local Kauai guy. He drove air crews from the airport to the hotel. That's what he did. And this is real. And if you look at the Kauai numbers, it's kind of scary because this, I think, and I don't think the ratios or the proportions are any different from any other island. I think it's all the same, or it should be relatively similar. The fact that they're not counting actives, could be a reason why they're looking at it with the low numbers. But the thing I wanted to talk about, and this time is going to go by really quick, but the governor now is considering shortening the quarantine to 10 days and expanding the time between the pre-travel test and the departure to 96 hours. What are your thoughts on that? And Dr. Dworkin, maybe you can start with us as the infectious disease specialist. Is that a wise thing to do?
It's a bad idea. and I'm sure Dara could talk you through the numbers on that perhaps better than me. But if a test 3 days prior to travel is insufficient, a test 4 days prior to travel is going to be more insufficient. The CDC changes in quarantine times reflect their sort of compromise with what they think people will adhere to, more so than they reflect any strong underlying science. What they're now saying is for close contacts of known positives, you can quarantine for 10 days and then get out in 10 days. And their theory is that, oh, well, people will do 10 days, but they won't do 14 days. I'm not sure that's true. It seems to me that the people who aren't quarantining are quarantining. And then they also say you can test out 7 days. And I think, we were talking about this, David and I, we spoke with a friend of ours who does epidemiology modeling. And I spoke with the infection control people at Queens. And our feeling was that this is really intended more to sort of loop the system and make it look like we're doing something and hopefully get people to adhere to the policy, as opposed to it being based on really stringent science. I think they should be doing just the opposite. They should keep the pre-travel tests, have an enforced quarantine, and then if they want to get people out of the quarantine a little early with the second test, that's not going to be perfect. We can be honest about it. We're going to miss something even if we do that, but it would probably be a lot higher than what we have now. So I just see this as additional loosening, and I hope it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
It's also called a dog and pony show. That's what I call it, the dog and pony show. You make it seem like you're doing something, but not really.
We've been fighting against this from the very beginning, Mel. This idea of sort of political theater trumping science, and I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I want to be helpful to our elected politicians. I don't want to be fighting with them, but we are under no obligation as physicians to cooperate with that kind of nonsense. We just got to call it out and say, nah, that's not a good idea for these reasons. And honestly, if you protect the public health, that's going to have downstream benefits. And I'm surprised at how few people understand that they seem to think, we'll just allow a little bit more disease in, and we'll get some short-term boost to our tax revenue or something. And then what? And then the thing collides and collapses, and we have a mess. One of the things that we haven't talked a whole lot about, someone put it on the comments section in your Facebook page, and I've been irritated about this for months now. There was an article in the Civil Beat, I think it was Von Lee, back in November, talking about how Hawaii still has over 100,000 kids. This was in November, maybe it's a little better now, but over 100,000 kids doing remote learning, and that we're one of the worst states in the country for getting kids back into the classroom, despite having one of the lower COVID rates. And wouldn't it be nice if some of our state politicians got up and got real angry and passionate about getting kids back into classrooms? And think about all the public health and economic benefits of that. Think about all the working women who go back to work, because it's disproportionately impacting women, this problem, right? It also impacts men. But there's tremendous public health benefits, educational benefits, economic benefits to having our schools up and running, and how much oxygen has been sucked out of the room trying to make Hawaii safe for the tourism industry, as compared to getting our kids back into schools. And I really hope someone, and maybe it'll be your mayor, I hope someone gets up and bangs that drum, because I think that's one that we need to talk about as a priority issue.
Yeah. No, I just would like to say, yeah, in terms of the 96-hour, I mean, I think as Dr. O'Connell said today, the hearing, CDC has a paper in preprint in which they call out 96 hours as being no more effective than just screening people for temperature. So it obviously, the nature of testing is the value of it is greatest if you get it closest to the time of travel, because then you would know the person is you're most likely to be catching it at a time when they're really infectious, right? And so you're doing two things. One, they're going to be infectious as tourists here, but they're also going to be infectious on that airplane, which you want to prevent, because despite what the airline industry tells us, we know now there's well-documented cases of people, even on masked airplanes. Initially, we just had data on unmasked travel, but now we have examples with mass travel where a number of people got infected on airplanes. So I think the ventilation systems on airplane are good, but it doesn't, if you're in a confined space for a long, long time when you're flying to Hawaii, and people take off their masks to have their drink and have their meal, et cetera, et cetera. So we're doing two things. One, that pre-travel testing is a good thing for that reason. But the further out you go, a couple of things. One, the test becomes less relevant. Suppose you tested a week before you came. Well, if the people who are positive, what good did that do? Most of them would have no longer been infectious by the time they got on the airplane. You would have screened out the wrong group of people. What you want to know are the people who are positive when they're getting on the airplane. And so the issue here is not good science. The issue is that there continues to be a huge barrier to doing testing that is timely. And we're really fortunate in Hawaii. I mean, our turnaround time in our organization is now reliably less than 24 hours. And how many places in the United States can say that? I keep on reading stories of people waiting 5 to 7 days to get their PCR swab back. And it's like, there's no way. The federal government should have simply said at the outset, we will not pay for a test past 72 hours. Because the meaning of the test, it becomes meaningless. And everyone knows the science on that. The test is not useful after a certain point in time. So, but we can't make enough tests somehow, or the laboratories. At this point in time, I have not seen a great explanation of why we can't test people with rapid turnaround time. I suspect, there is a certain economy here that if you're in this business, it doesn't pay for you to add a lot of staff and a lot more machines and a lot more buildings for something that might go away in the next 12 months, number one. Number two, if you can get paid to do something in a week's time, that you should be getting paid to do it in a day's time, we know that what's going to make you more money. And I know there are issues with reagents, and there are issues with swabs, and there are issues with manpower. There are real issues, but it doesn't, it's amazing that 10 months in, and this of course speaks to political leadership at the highest levels, that we have not solved this, that we should be able to test people with reliable spit tests that could give us a result rapidly, and probably be doing that repeatedly. I mean, I really think that is going to be the way to go, that the benefit of that. And so all this could change very quickly under a new administration and some new priorities with the FDA, and some more investments in testing capacity, et cetera. And that might be a game changer for Hawaiian tourism. If we can figure out a way to do this stuff so that we really can get a whole handle on who is infected, we should do that. I mean, the commitment should be to making travel as safe as possible for the tourist, for the people around the tourist, and for the destination where the tourist is going to. That should be the commitment. All of us should say, what is it to be excellent in that regard? And let's map out what excellence looks like, and then let's set out a path to get there, instead of kind of, I think the big issue I've seen from the outset here is kind of, well, God, that's the best we can do. I don't want to, let's just do this in sort of a half-assed way. No, let's describe what excellent looks like first. Let's nail that down. We might not be able to get there right away. Let's say it. We can tell the general public, here are the barriers to doing excellence in testing. Here are the barriers to doing excellence in quarantine and isolation. But we're going to aim for it, and we're going to get there. And you know what? Everyone's looking at this vaccine right now, that it's going to solve everything. It's going to be a while before it solves a lot of things, and it's never going to solve everything. We're going to be dealing with this situation for some time to come. We better get we should really commit, all of our political leaders need to commit to excellence for this. I know that they live in a different reality. They have a different set of pressures than I do. I appreciate that. I wouldn't, I wouldn't want to have to deal with those kind of pressures. But the starting point for this should be for us to all agree what it is we're trying to do. And I think we're, first and foremost, we're trying to keep our communities, our neighbors, our families safe. And that comes before anything. And
I think, Doc, the the emphasis for Hawaii anyway has always been the tourism. It has always been the convenience of the visitor. That's kind of where we've been, and we've, the whole testing issue. We don't have enough tests. The governor said out of his own mouth that he was not going to support any request by a mayor that was going to impose more restrictions on a visitor. He said it on a TV interview. I saw it myself. That has been the focus. And, the whole 4-day, extending it to 4 days is because the people cannot get their test results. These visitors, and then with the most recent rule where if you don't have your test result before you leave, you're automatically stuck to a 14-day quarantine. That was affecting tourism numbers. So, HTA, MUFI, and all of these guys called the governor and said, hey, it ain't working, man. We're getting cancellations. Can we extend it out? They're not using medical science in these decisions. They're using political science. And I think that's where we're going sideways. And it's causing a problem and creating an unsafe environment for not just the visitors, but for the locals. And that's what bothers me tremendously.
I think it's backfiring. I mean, that's the thing. You do things kind of quick and loose, thinking you're going to, juice the economy. And then, what ends up happening? These persnickety doctors make noise and say, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. And then some people get sick. And then you have your mayors and your city councilmen and your state senators, balking at the plan. And in the end, the whole thing gets derailed. So this is why original concept, just do the right thing. Just set up the system in a way that you're going to get some critical mass of people that is going to support it. You've got a quarantine, but it's a little bit shorter. You've got a test before and test after. You're going to accept it. You're going to have fewer tourists coming in because we may not have enough tests to do 30,000 a day like this. Maybe we do 5,000 to 10,000 a day, but we can sustain that and it'll have legitimacy. It's not going to please everybody. Some people won't, but it's going to please a lot of people. And I think you're going to have less problems with people abandoning ship halfway through, like it did. I just want to bang my education drum one more time. David, you and I, we saw a survey. I can't remember the link. I'll try to find it and send it to you guys later. It was a survey of economists over the summer. And they asked them, of all the economic activity, this was around the country, what's most important, in terms of keeping things open? And, it was schools.
Back to school.
It was back to school. It wasn't, oh no, we need to have the hotel open or the restaurant association, and these were economists at university. These are guys, they're not known for their Bolshevism. These are people who were thinking about how to get capitalism working in the United States, right? And the rationale for most of them was, education predicts all kinds of income outcomes in the medium to long term. And even in the short term, it has a huge impact on how parents function and how parents work, right? So you can get a lot of people back into work a lot quicker. So I'm surprised at how little attention that issue has gotten relative to these other things. And that, to me, speaks to the way in which politics has warped the conversation. So I think it's appropriate to keep pushing back against that.
And the other night we had our Kauai complex superintendent with 2 KK nurses on our show, and one of the questions was about testing our employees, testing our students at school to make sure it's safe, so we can get more kids back in school, provide that environment. And we keep hearing, Charlie cracks me up, and I'll let him share his explanation of. We always have a concern about capacity of tests. We just don't have the tests. That's the excuse. Yeah, we may have $300 or $400 million sitting in CARES money somewhere that who knows what's going to be used for, but we never have tests. But Charlie, tell your story, Charlie, or explain how all of a sudden, right before we opened up the trusted partners. So Charlie figured out how all these tests are popping up for everyone else but the state. Charlie, you remember?
Yeah, basically what had happened was, as once you retire from the police department, you get bored and you start to look on solving other things if you can. And what I started to do is I got attracted to the testing because they said we don't have enough tests. And I found out that the state, what they do is they're planting these test kits in the ground and they're watering them every day. And that's how all these test kits are popping up all over the darn place. Because they told me, I said, bro, just the other week, they said we don't have enough tests. And all of a sudden, they get tests coming out of everybody's calling now. I said, what the hell happened?
For the visitors, yeah?
Yeah.
For the visitors.
For the
man.
visitors.
And I just said,
There's no shortage.
I wanted to touch on you because there's a big contention about the traveler, and they said, well, the planes are safe. Yeah, and we got someone on tonight who's a master mechanic for one of the airlines, and we've had discussions in length with him about the circulation. And I told him, I've ridden planes where if you're sitting down and you start to perspire, that's a good indicator that you don't have good circulation because you're not supposed to perspire. That's one. Two, if you can smell somebody's body odor 2 seats away, you don't have good circulation. Three, if you had positive suction to pull whatever is floating around in that plane down to the ground, then basically anybody and everybody with long hair should actually pull towards the floor. That's how it would work. So that's why I know, on the side, I do disinfecting for COVID. I got the commercial foggers. And what I do is I'm amazed at watching because, and correct me if I'm wrong, doctors, but droplets are just like fog, right? Small water particles, depend on the micron size, right?
Yep.
It leaves the fogger and I'm watching it, and I'd be standing on one end of a classroom and I'm watching it drift all the way to the other end. Now, the only thing between that fogger and a human is the amount of pressure it takes to exhale the droplets from your body, correct?
Right.
So that's why I'm even saying, I don't even think 6 feet is enough. Just by what, every time I'm cleaning, I'm watching this fog just drifting over to the other side and it's continually moving. So I said, gee, is 6 feet enough?
Yeah.
I said, why don't
Well, and
we?
the 6 feet was really based on the idea that this was not an aerosol.
Aerosolize, right.
Yep. And
And-
now
and
we
I
know
met-
there's plenty of good examples now, particularly from restaurant clusters, where you can find that the people were infected at great distances within
Mhm.
a restaurant. And we have not paid enough attention yet to proper air circulation in our buildings in general. I mean, it was one of the first things. I'm fortunate that one of the people I work closely with, my COO actually is from Hong Kong. And so she lived through SARS and knows about these epidemics. And so was really akamai about some of this stuff. And right away was saying, what can we do to put in HEPA filters, do UV lights, can we open windows where in an air-conditioned building, that's oftentimes it's difficult to do. The air conditioning systems are not designed mostly in Hawaii to do that well, but there are ways you can improve the quality of air, and every little bit counts. That whole theory that the masks aren't going to be perfect, but they help. The air circulation can't be perfect, but it'll help. Not spending too much time in a room, not perfect, but it'll help. You get all those different layers, and then if you have enough layers in place, actually the incidence of these infections goes way, way down. In fact, I think, we're mostly seeing in the healthcare field that infections that are happening in the hospitals and the clinics are more often than not pauhana situations, lunch break situations, not during patient care, because during patient care, you're really attentive to all the details that you have to take care of. It's when you let your guard down. And I want to, I would be remiss not to, extend my appreciation for the people of Hawaii, because the fact that we're doing the best of any state in the United States, we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to this failed place, but we are doing the best. And in large measure, it's because the people of Hawaii are doing a darn good job here. And despite our differences with our leaders and some decisions they've made, they've done a really good job. I mean, relative to other places, they made some hard calls. There were mistakes that were made along the way, but we are doing well because of people pulling together. People, you know, I talk to my family, some of whom live up on the mainland, and you know, they say they continue to go out shopping, and people are in a Costco or Walmart, and they don't have masks on. And I said, you never, at least I never see that here in Oahu. I haven't seen a person in a store without a mask in months. So I think, you know, a lot of credit goes to these simple measures that people have taken to be safe, masking, not getting together in big groups. You know, could we do better? We'd better learn how to do better. This thing, if anyone is getting complacent right now that the numbers won't go up, they're kidding themselves. We know, looking anywhere in the world, that can change overnight. And it's fast when it happens. Remember how fast it happened to us back in July, August. It just took off. And it particularly took off in the community where I work. We had over 500 cases.
You know, I've always said, you know, to Mel, and it kind of gets me when one particular government official is saying, you know, we're doing really good. We're doing really good. I said, okay, then why the hell every damn day we get cases? Because if we're doing good, we should be at zero. What the hell are you talking about? You know?
No, you're right.
And I hear we do good when you got 0 cases. So now it's all about working towards that step, right? So the thing is, if we're putting in measures now that's working okay, wouldn't we try to better try to do a little better to bring it down even more? We shouldn't be going the opposite way and say, okay, now we can relax. As if all the cases we have now is gonna just fly away on its own. That's one. Two, Mel and I just discussed this the other night, and we said, you know what's really funny is when they can't contact trace efficiently, it's very easy to say community spread over travel related.
Yeah, that's right.
Because
Senator,
we said, as investigators, we like to go backwards. We like to see, hey, where the hell did it come from? And you work it out until you can't work it out anymore. But I guess these guys are against time, so they just say, well, we stop here. Yeah, it's a toss-up, but we'll go with community spread. But it could be travel related too, but who knows?
You know, Charlie, early on, John said something to me that I stuck with me, which he said, look, in this pandemic, either we're on the attack or the virus is on the attack. There isn't anything in between. You can't let your guard down. And this complacency around the numbers we got you right now, you're absolutely right. We shouldn't be happy with that. We should be saying, hey, you guys, let's see if by January we can get down to 50. And then let's see if by February we can drive it down under 20. Because you know what? Imagine how much easier it would be for all of us to be out shopping, the kids in school, going to restaurants, if those were our numbers right now. One of my close friends used to be the state epidemiologist here in Hawaii. He's in Western Australia now in Perth. He shot me a video last week of him in a big concert. They're going out to concerts because they don't have any cases in Perth. They haven't had any cases in Western Australia. The only cases they have are the ones who are stuck in quarantine because they nailed it down doing just what you said. They eliminated it. I mean, people say, well, Western Australia isn't all desert. Well, no, I mean, Perth is like, there's like 5 million people there. So, no, it's not 5. I think it's like 3 million people. It's a lot bigger than Hawaii. So,
and I think that's, when you look at Hawaii's population of 1 million or a little over 1 million, and you compare that with these states that are blowing up that are much larger in population, maybe more dense because, they're not on islands spread apart. It's really hard to compare us to them. It is very difficult because it's different. A place like New York, where everybody's in a lot of people in a small place. But then you go to someplace like South Korea and you have a lot more people in a much smaller place and they're doing well. So we're not. And I don't know I didn't do the math with comparing Hawaii per capita with the other states. But, we have a very small population and the delicate, because we don't have the ability, and you both know how how fragile our medical resources, our hospital bed supplies are on all of our islands. It's a different animal. We cannot compare us to California or Oregon or Texas. We don't have the luxury of transporting a patient to a neighboring state, neighboring county for that matter. You got to fly them over. So it's scary, because if we get to that point where it's beyond the control and then we got to let it play itself out, a lot of people are going to die. And that has always been my fear, that we just don't have the facilities in place.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and if you look at the history of epidemics, they usually emerge because of changes in human behavior. There's some kind of disruption. There's some kind of disruption, whether it be agriculture, migration, environmental degradation. Something shifts. Often it's a human behavior that lets these things loose. We've not yet identified the specific human behavior that let this pandemic loose. But it's also human behavior that controls it. And you know, that's the difference. Time and time and time again. There's all kinds of examples of rural places doing terrible. You know, look at the Dakotas right now. It's not just cities, right? And then there's places that are urban that have done very well, particularly in Asia, you know, and whatnot. So it comes down to us, and to the extent that we have done relatively better than other states in the United States. We're blessed by our geography, but we're also blessed by having humans that live here that want to do the right thing, people that speak up for doing the right thing, and that have formed a community around doing the right thing, and that are willing to make our politicians annoyed at times. We want to do the right thing, and that's the difference. It's a behavioral difference between where we live and where places have let this be under control. So I don't think we should let up. I'm relatively optimistic that the situation will improve, both because of the vaccine and because of the rapid testing that David alluded to. But we're not there yet. We've got at least, I think, a few bumpy months to navigate here, probably more than that when all is said and done. You know, fortunately, we've got the Darago Carols on our team.
Yeah, that hour went by. That's probably one of the quickest hours we've ever had. But I did want to ask one more question, and we can tie this in. So you answer the question and do your closing comments to our viewers. And there'll be a lot of people that watch this. The question is real simple. It's, do you think that we have gotten past the Thanksgiving surge? Thanksgiving was just a couple weeks ago. Do you believe we've seen the surge from the Thanksgiving gatherings and get-togethers? And we can start with you, Dr. Dave, and then at this, you know, when you after the questions, go ahead and give us your closing comments.
So the data from our clinic is somewhat reassuring in that regard. Our test positive rate at KKV throughout the month of August was high 30%.
Wow.
We had weeks that we were at 38% test positivity.
Wow.
This past week we were at 2%. And mostly as closing remark, I want to thank the incredible team I work with, who have been steadfast. They have been willing to spin on a dime to do what needed to be done. They have shown so much love and care for their community members and done whatever needed to be done, they could. And working in difficult circumstances, we had to convert a basement parking lot into our COVID clinic. And we had to, a lot of people's jobs shifted to doing meal delivery, helping people with rental assistance, getting on the phone to call our kupuna who are feeling alone and isolated and scared. And they've just done this incredible job with that. And the community has in turn responded and is behaving, I think, responsibly, which accounts for getting those numbers down. You know, it's not easy to get a number like that down in a community like Kalihi, 2%. People live in really crowded housing. Of the cases we've seen this year, fully half of them lived in homes with more than 7 people, or 7 or more people. So, and just last week we had a household come in, a young man came in to get tested. Didn't really want, the family didn't want to be involved or get tested, but they felt they had a good experience with the testing. He tested positive. The 11 family members he lived with came in, they were all positive. It was the first time we'd seen a 100% positive rate, but they live in a small apartment. And there's just no way for people to safely isolate in that situation. And we're working hard now with the Department of Health to get people into hotels. And kudos to Mayor Caldwell and to the Department of Health for standing up a hotel isolation program, making rooms available. It got off to a rocky start. It's much better now. We can continue to improve that. It's important, particularly in a place like Kalihi where there's so much crowding, that if you identify someone's infected, get them into a hotel room, but then take care of them while they're there. Get them, 3 good meals, make sure they got as many video channels as they need to occupy that long period of recuperation. Have a doctor call them every day and check in on them. Do the right thing for them. And we are doing that, and that accounts for the 2%. And I'm really proud of our community to do that. As I say, that isn't easy, and I want us to be able to keep it up. Does that mean we're past the Thanksgiving surge? I think we're in that window now where we're just we're going to breathe a sigh of relief, and then we'll head into Christmas, in which it'll be even harder. And we'll want people to start to think about, how are you going to do your Christmas this year safely? Ideally outdoors, ideally with masks on, ideally not in groups of 30, but in small groups. Ideally, if you're going to be with your kupuna, that you really have been super careful the week and 2 weeks before that yourself, so that you're not bringing infection into this high-risk group. But I've taken care of a lot of patients in the last few months. They weren't high risk. I mean, some and one patient just came out of Queens Hospital after 72 days. Relatively young man. He's definitely happy to be alive, but he's got a long recuperation ahead of him after 72 days, much of it in the ICU. This is a tough infection. We shouldn't kid around. A lot of people don't realize it can hit people really hard. I think Hawaii is a small enough place now that most people know someone who's been affected. I want everyone just to keep on. We can do this, Hawaii. We are doing it, but let's get better. Let's not be satisfied with this 100 cases a day. Let's nail this thing. We can only do it together. It really is a community effort here. Support, if you're living next door to an elderly person who can't go to the store safely, do their shopping for them. Check in on them, make sure, ask how they're doing. Reach out to someone. Maybe you can't hug someone today. Your eyes can show it all. Telehealth isn't the greatest form of healthcare that I would want to deliver. But when I zoom in to see my patients who I've known for 30 years, and I see their eyes and they see my eyes, and we reestablish that connection, and we know this is what it is right now. This is how it is to be safe. And we can all appreciate that. We can make this. It's getting long. Nobody probably expected it was going to go this long. It's going to go longer. We got to be strong here. And I think we can be. And I want to thank you both for doing this show and being, when I've tuned in, I don't always get to watch, but I'm always amazed that you guys have been on the sort of the front line of doing the right thing. I swear you should have a much larger following on the mainland. Maybe the mayors in some of the cities should hire you guys to do their planning for them.
Thank you. That's nice.
Yes.
Dr. Dworkin.
Yeah, I think 10 to 14 days incubation time after Thanksgiving. Another week after that, at least, before we feel it in the hospital. So I think we're on the edge of it, but we're not quite through it. And then, as David said, we're going to be getting into Christmas and New Year's. And you know, my advice to all the government officials that I've run into, a limited number, has been, be a Grinch. This is a good year to embrace your inner Grinch, and this is not the time to have big parties. So I suspect it's going to be a bumpy few weeks. People aren't going to be perfect, but we want them to do their best. And I'm looking at it sort of as like the next month is going to be hard, and we're going to have to see how we get through it. And I'll just end with my comment on human behavior. I think we've got a lot of good humans here in Hawaii, and that's our best asset during this. It really is, because that's how we're going to control transmission and get through this thing. So, you know, I hope we keep working on that on all of our different islands, and even if we have a need to respond differently in each island, that we continue to work together as a big community.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. Charles?
Well, first, as always, I'd like to say thank you so very much to our two guests tonight. Very informative. Thank you very much, Dr. Derauf and Dr. Dworkin. I appreciate it so much for you being on here. You know, to our viewers out there, again, as I reiterate every single time when we're about to go off the air, that our main focus is just to inform and educate. Whatever information you take away from this, you use it however you want to use it. If you're one of those that don't believe in it, then you're one of those that don't believe it. I can't convince you otherwise. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you one thing, having been personally affected, that's the reason why I'm driven to do what I do. Because, you know, we've got friends that have been affected. You know, plenty of people can say that there are many people that, you know, survived it. That's true. But are they fully recovered? No, their lives are changed. It'll possibly be forever. They're not the same. We've seen it. We can, you know, a good friend, strong person in George Ma. Look at him now. He's doing well, but you can just hear it in his voice. He needs to take a breather every so many minutes because his capacity has diminished a lot. And that's a hard thing to swallow. That's a hard thing to swallow. So I want you folks out there to know that, you know, there is a vaccine. It's up to you whether you want to take it. But, you know, please don't believe in this conspiracy that there's something in the vaccine to track humans. No, it's not. Just because you see, you know, you see the print, some bold print that, you know, there's a tracking device in these vaccines. You know, to one of those who wrote on tonight's feed, I said, no, it's not there to track humans. It's there to save people. Okay. So just, you know, and what Dr. Derauf said about checking your kupunas, I've always said it on a lot of my posts. If you live close to a kupuna, just go by. You're gonna notice something out of place. If you see their garage, it's different. Something, or if you notice that the paper guy that throws the paper hasn't been picked up. If you start seeing collected at the front doorstep, go knock on the door. Maybe something happened. We don't know, but you know, for us that live in a neighborhood with a lot of kupunas, I say we are obligated to check on them. Just go and check on them whenever you can. Okay, so thank you very much, Mel.
Right on. Thanks, Charlie. Thank you, doctors. Always a pleasure, man. I mean, it's just so informative. I think, you know, watching the comments, you know, people appreciate straight talk, straight just information. I just want to end with the importance of our individual responsibility again, guys. You heard it from the doctors tonight. You hear it from the doctors every night. You hear it from politicians. You hear it from everyone. That's one thing we all can agree on, is that it's up to us. We got to wear our masks. We need to disinfect. We need to stay away from gatherings. We need to take care of each other, or else we're not going to make it through. This will be a whole lot longer if we cannot do those simple things. You know, we see you guys on Facebook taking pictures, all hanging out together, and you know, the problem is you may not get sick. You may be part of that 40% asymptomatic, but you're spreading this thing to the kupuna, and then they're having a terrible time trying to figure out where they got the infection. Guys, just do what we got to do for as long as we need to, so we can get through this and get to the other side. One day we are going to have, Charlie's going to do this huge party at the stadium.
So you
everything,
say, so
everything free. We'll have food, we'll have beverages, we'll have musicians. We'll have, you know, probably 40, 50,000 people there. But that day will come. We just gotta do our part. We gotta do our part. Charlie,
I hope I can make that dollar in my pocket stretch, boy.
But anyway, we appreciate all you viewers, guys. Every single night you come on with us, and for our guests, I know you guys are busy. You guys got families, whatever. We appreciate you guys' time.
Thank you.
You guys all take care. Stay safe. God bless. We love you guys. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. We'll see you guys. Same place. Let me get to my right button here. Okay, guys. Aloha.
Aloha.
Hello.